Welcome in. We'll start with a few quick intros. And today's session is going to be about real-world lessons on fraud fighting. I'll start here with a quick background on myself. Come from a computer science background, second-time co-founder, now CEO and co-founder at Incognia, which is a company in the fraud prevention space and digital identity. And yeah, that's all for now. Nice to meet you all. I think you're next. Jacob.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Kestenbaum. I am Director of Business Development at Cyber and Intelligence Solutions at Mastercard. I've spent about a decade in business development, sales, account management roles in payments companies, Bill.com, Payoneer, and most recently at Mastercard. For 3 years, I managed some of the largest digital merchants, including marketplaces, relationships. So eBay, Ticketmaster are some of those merchants. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic today.
Vishal, you're next.
Hey, guys. It's great to be here. I am Vishal. I am a Senior Director of Product at Shipt. Shipt is a delivery company. It's the largest acquisition of Target in the history of Target. A delivery company, there's a customer side, there's a store side where the inventory is, and then there's a shopper side. It's a gig-based company like your Uber Eats, your Instacart, your DoorDashes. And so I am on the gig side of the company. And one of the things that I own, which is relevant to the talk, is I own all of shopper earnings that go into the shopper's pockets when they decide to come and work for us. And I did a panel in the morning, but I'll repeat myself. In terms of the P&L surface area, in 2021, 2022, we disbursed about $1 billion into the shopper's pockets. So it's a very large P&L surface area. And this topic is very relatable because when you manage that much money through different products, things happen. So that's sort of what makes this topic very special. Of course, the panel is very special. I'm very excited to present with Andre and Jacob here. Through my background, I was at Lyft before Shipt. Before that, I started my PM journey at a game called Words with Friends. If anybody remembers Words with Friends, awesome. Yeah, so it used to be this social gaming thing, way back in the day. And before that, I was an engineer and an engineering manager for a long time. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free. That's my URL right there, or you can look me up as well. But it's great to be here.
By the way, I have to comment that fighting fraud in the gig economy space is really challenging because there are more actors involved, right? You don't have only like sellers and buyers, but you also have the delivery drivers, which makes it a lot more complex.
Yes.
Kudos to you on being able to manage that. So we're going to start with Jacob here, bring a little bit more perspective on marketplaces and the challenges involved. So,
all right,
Jacob,
so Craigslist, the OG. Anybody still use Craigslist? All right. Anybody sell on Craigslist? That guy. Craigslist is a classified website. It was founded in 1995, around the same time that eBay and Angie's List, I think, were founded as well. They have hundreds of millions of users, about 100 million postings per month. I think about 20% of that is for job listings, and it's very, very popular. However, Craigslist is known to be very risky, pretty shady website, marketplace. Hopefully no one here is from Craigslist. For some reason, some of the reasons being, there's no requirement to verify your ID. You don't have to open an account on Craigslist. Don't have to add a bank account or a card. Another one is there's no buyer or seller protection. So if there's a dispute, you're probably not going to get your money back if a fraudster takes advantage of you. So yeah, some of the scams, fake listings. It's known and reported that there's been violence and abuse on Craigslist, as well as personal identity theft. If you're providing your name, your email, your phone number, they could take advantage of that. So if we enter the new age of marketplaces that we all know and love and trust. There are 4 reasons from my point of view why marketplaces in the modern age are more trustworthy. One of them is, as I mentioned before, verification. So most marketplaces today ask you to verify your identity in some kind of way. Maybe send in some documentation. If you're a seller, ID. Another one is feedback. So, the ability for users to rate their, service providers or sellers, or leave a review. And on the other side, for the sellers to be able to basically build up a reputation for the quality service or product that they're selling is very valuable. Another one is payment protection. So, there's buyer protection programs, gives the buyer and the seller peace of mind in a transaction. And last but not least, dispute resolution. So if there's some sort of dispute or argument, then the marketplaces often have some some regulation around what's allowed, what's not allowed, and able to resolve the issue. However, new tech, as everybody knows, does bring the fraudsters along with them. And not only that, but fraudsters are able to take their fraud to another level and to new heights, and do it on a much more massive scale. So marketplaces today have a much bigger responsibility of staying up to date on all fraud trends, and also educating their users on how to watch out for these things. So with that, I have a question for you guys. There are several different types of fraud, and I think I've heard you before mention, how would you categorize fraud? Or I know there's abuse, I know there's financial fraud, there are scams, so how do you sort of categorize these things? Whoever wants to take it.
Okay, I can kick it off. So the way we think about fraud in our space, being where I sit, we do classify that into 2 broad categories. We do think of fraud as sort of your classical fraud, where something nefarious is happening, something that is illegal, that you shouldn't be doing. You're impersonating somebody. You're probably, swiping somebody's payment away. You're, creating fraudulent bank transactions, things like that. Abuse is a very interesting area where the product or the service that you're trying to use allows you to do it, right? But you are always trying to find this sort of loopholes in the product or service to sort of benefit yourself. And what that actually leads to is it creates a very unfair situation, unfair experience for everybody else who's also all the other participants in the marketplace as well. So if you, for example, were on the supply side, if you were on the demand side, fraud can happen anywhere, but there are these situations where somebody will take a loophole and exploit it so badly that now the product is forced or the service is forced to introduce some friction to avoid that. But the challenge with that is now you've kind of introduced friction for everybody else, right? So that is what abuse is. That is how you handle abuse. Fraud is a little more black and white because you know that somebody is basically taking away somebody's livelihood or their payments or things like that. Somebody stole somebody's SSN, credit card. That's a little more black and white that you can go and there are clear-cut ways of resolving that as well. But abuse is something where I think it becomes grayer. And then you get into this area of how does the market, what are the principles, how does the marketplace want to run itself? And then how do you how are you trying to sort of disincentivize the bad actors by doing what is allowed and abusing it, versus you're keeping a good experience for the other good actors, most of the good actors who participate in your marketplace. So that's just to set context. That's the way we think about it in two broad categories. Would love to see if you had anything to add.
Yeah, awesome. Well, wanted to just comment on the previous thing, which is I think this was a great opener, Jacob, on the unbundling of Craigslist, right? And we can see that the companies that resulted from that have invested way more in trust and safety, fraud prevention, like building a more robust stack to verify the identity of their users. So I would say that all the companies here obviously are interested in improving their stack, right? So I think that was a great opener. When it comes to the different types of fraud and abuse, I totally agree with you. Like there are things that when you're building your product, right? When you're building your platform, you eventually don't think about what could go wrong. And usually we try to model our products just thinking about the happy path. But there are bad people out there, right, that will try to identify vulnerabilities and exploit those in these platforms. So I like the definition of like, this is fraud, black and white, very, very clear, like illegal activity, like payment fraud, for example. But there's also abuse, right? There's also people creating like multiple accounts to exploit like incentive programs like coupons for new accounts, or referral bonuses, right? Or refund policies, right? That get abused as well. And the more complex the marketplace, as we were talking about gig economy more recently, the more complex are these schemes, right? You have like collusion, for example, between different parties. You would have like a delivery driver colluding with maybe a restaurant or consumers. So identifying those things is way more challenging than the black and white fraud that we tend to know more about. So yeah, just have very little to add to your definition, to be honest. But I think we could maybe get into more about the common scams, right, and the things we're seeing across the marketplace.
I was just going to ask what types of common, what you see at Shipt as a product manager over there.
Yeah, so I'll give you guys a few examples, and hopefully this becomes relatable, and you guys see how, when you're running, business with a large P&L surface area, how this sort of manifests itself a little bit. So I'll first start off by, I'll tee it off by what Andre just said, collusion. So at Lyft and Uber, there are articles out there, you can Google this, where when you are in a market where there aren't that many drivers, let's say you're in a small market where, maybe you have 100 drivers, maybe you have 200, the supply pool is limited. There have been instances where people have actually, they know each other because it's a small area and people kind of know each other. All of them have, quote unquote, colluded to go offline simultaneously so that the surge pricing actually raises the prices for everybody. This has happened. This is well known. That they create an artificial depletion of supply. This is abuse. This is classic abuse. Artificial depletion of supply to game the pricing algorithms. We see variants of this at Shipt as well. We have a surge pricing algorithm. We have different products for pricing, for paying our shoppers. That's one example. What do you do, like in that case, right? What do you do when nobody's willing to come online, or they're waiting for the prices to go up so that when they come online, they slowly trickle in so that, they are trying to basically extract maximum value out of the marketplace for themselves. What do you do? Well, some of the things that you can do, and this is not speaking for Uber or Lyft, but just me putting my hat on as a product manager. One of the things that you can do is you can try and detect an outlier event where you know that it's not normal for everybody in the marketplace to go offline like that. It's just outlier. That doesn't happen. And when that happens, the marketplace takes a stand. This comes into policy design. The marketplace takes a stand and says, we are not going to raise our surge at this point. We are just going to reject our demand. We might just even go to our riders and tell them that we are unwilling to take any rides because we can't find drivers. Maybe that is a legitimate situation, maybe it isn't. More likely it is not, because it just feels like such an outlier that everybody's offline, sort of, but we are not going to go there. So these are some of the trade-offs that we always think about. That's one example of a scam, but these are sort of the trade-offs that when you're designing your marketplace, when you're building your policies, you have to kind of build these checks at the very front of the funnel, so that things don't go wrong at the bottom. So I would start with that. Jacob, anything to add to that from Mastercard, maybe from your experiences?
In terms of
Any common scams that you are aware of, for example?
Yeah, so one common scam that's come up recently, it's gained popularity. I think we have a slide on that, maybe the triangle over there. It's called triangulation fraud. Anyone's heard of triangulation fraud?
Yeah.
All right, so hopefully I'll do a good job at explaining this, but it's a triangle, and each point, there are 3 points in the triangle for the 3 parties that are involved, so the buyer, the fraudulent seller, and the marketplace. And I see this, more common in like delivery marketplaces, where basically the fraudulent seller will create a fake social media account and promote like 50% off a product or a service. And then a buyer will contact the fraudulent seller and say, I'm interested. The fraudulent seller will then collect their payment information or get a payment through like Zelle or Venmo, for example, and then the fraudulent seller will go ahead and purchase it from a marketplace. And when they do that, they'll give the marketplace the stolen credit card number. So, but what they'll also do is give the buyer's legitimate address. So the buyer will then receive the goods from the marketplace, and the person whose card was stolen will then file a chargeback, and the fraudulent seller ends up pocketing the money that was sent to them by the buyer. So the marketplace just ends up like, dumbfounded, not understanding like what occurred. So that's another example of a scam that's growing popularity right now.
Well, a few examples to add here. One also from the delivery industry, more related to refund abuse, right? So, I didn't get my food, but you actually got it. How do you prove it, right? Like there's a way to verify if the driver took a picture of like the food at your door, but how do you verify if that picture is legitimate, for example, or if it's fake? So that's a challenging thing, and fighting it really requires understanding like if the driver actually got there like physically using some sort of location information, for example. So that's one challenge. Another that I've been seeing recently is in the vacation rental space around fake listings. Actually, I was a victim of this one. I booked a place in Yosemite. It was about a year ago. And I got there, it was like midnight after like crazy hiking, and the place didn't exist. And I was knocking on the doors of the neighbors, and they were like, no, there's no such place here. Well, ended up like finding a hotel nearby, but it was a terrible experience. Got my money back very quickly. That was the easy part. But obviously the platform lost that money, right? And not sure what exactly they did afterwards. But anyways, fake listings is another problem that I've been seeing, and I was actually a victim of it. And then the third one, which was quite impressive, also from the delivery industry, was one that involved like even tampering with like harder devices, in which the scam basically involved having the driver pick up the food at the restaurant, and right there they would cancel the order. So you as a customer, you would receive like a notification saying like this order was canceled. But then the driver would show up at your place with the food, with the receipt, everything is fine. The food is still hot. And they would say, well, I'm sorry, there was a bug on the app. Your order was canceled, but and the payment didn't go through. I have a POS here so that you can pay with your credit card. The thing was the device was tempered. So when they typed like $50, you were actually paying $5,000.
Yeah.
And you would only detect that afterwards, right? The driver already ran away, you lost your money. And the challenge of that one is that the fraud was occurring outside the platform. The platform didn't see that happening, right? So that was a super challenging thing. Luckily, we were able to help this company solve this issue, but it was one of the toughest scams that I've seen in the food delivery space. So yeah, 3 more to add here to the discussion. Obviously, we need to talk about solutions, not only problems, right?
Yeah. I'll add one more maybe, which is probably relatable to this audience. Both Lyft and Uber, or rideshare services in general, they are trying to do the right thing they try to do the right thing. And what they do is, they do not show you the destination of where somebody is going before you actually go and pick them up, right? This is to promote equity on the platform. There are underserved areas where there isn't public transportation or transportation generally available, and they do not want drivers, for example, to not go and serve those underserved areas, right? So it comes out of a very benign and a very thoughtful mission or a thoughtful vision, as that's what they want to do. Now here's what happens, right? A driver shows up, and I'm not sure if this has happened to any of you before, but the driver shows up. It's happened to me. Driver shows up. As soon as they swipe that they are there to pick you up, at that point, obviously, they need to know what the destination is. So they find out because the app tells them. At that point, they make a decision of whether or not they want to go that far or not, right? Because now they're cherry picking at that point. But the way it works is, if they declined it, then the app monitors pickup rates and so on, because that does count as a propensity to sort of not serve that platform, right? Not serve that area, for example, because that is the reason why the driver is now waffling a little bit after seeing the destination. So if the driver canceled, for example, then the app takes a note of that, and the future work that the drivers get is kind of impacted, and so on and so forth. So now what the drivers do, and this is again comes into the area of policy design and abusing it, the drivers will actually ask the passengers to cancel. I don't know if this has happened to any of you, but they will actually text you saying, right there, I see one hand. So they'll ask the passengers to cancel, saying that, can you cancel, because I can't. They'll be in that, you can see the GPS is in that area, but they're not quite near you. And they're like, I can't make a turn. They'll come up with some excuse. I can't turn left. I'm stuck. It'll take me 10 minutes to get to you. There's something going on. Can you cancel? So if the passenger cancels, that's not the driver's fault, right? So these kind of things happen. And it's very difficult, right, for a marketplace that is trying to do right for a lot of these use cases. It's very, very difficult to add friction to this type of a use case that impacts everybody, and guilty until proven innocent. Like, that's not how marketplaces operate. They always operate from the innocent until proven guilty, and that's how they sort of build things. But this is one example that comes to mind, which gets abused. And usually when riders do cancel in this scenario, is because they are new. They don't know. They have not done this. They're like, fine, I can't deal with this right now. I'll cancel. I'll call another one. And that's fine. I'll get charged $5. But I think ultimately what happens is, in the background, the app has taken note that the driver did not intend to not serve that area, right? The driver's intention was clear. And that's what the apps are actually going for, to create equity. And in this case, if the rider cancels, then the driver's intention is preserved. So this is sort of one roundabout way in which abuse happens as well. So, yeah.
Well, just one more. But the most basic, which is creating multiple accounts to abuse coupons, right? That's the most simple form of abuse within marketplaces, but had to mention it.
Yeah.
So now we are actually going to talk a little bit more about solutions. So maybe we could start with you, Vishal. What have you done so far to fight these types of abuse and fraud, and what have worked, what didn't, and what would be your recommendations?
Yeah. So I'll again start at a high level, and I'll say that the way you build solutions, right, when you're fighting, well, first you should try and anticipate as best as possible. Try to design your marketplace so it is resilient. Any feature launches, any policy changes that you're making, try and see if there can be a lot of loopholes and cover your bases, because a lot of these things can lead to incidents sometimes, right? Like if somebody's bank account gets swiped, for example, without you having a two-factor authentication in place. If somebody just easily impersonates somebody else and takes their bank account and does a transaction, things like that also happen. So those are table stakes, in which case you need to make your marketplace resilient as you even build it. But then I would say there are two broad categories. One of them is there are problems that you can actually or have to actually automate with technology. And then there are problems that are a lot more grayer and hopefully are not at a scale which is they're not at that scale where you probably can throw people at the problem and should throw people at the problem. I think I'll give you two very, very simple examples. One of them is, let's talk about the second one first. Where can you run something with people, or should you run something with people, right? So people who come and work for marketplaces like Shipt, right? We consider it a privilege that people, spend their, a large part of their life, giving us the chance to serve our customers versus going to our competitors. So we absolutely consider that a privilege. But there are bad actors. And so what happens is, if, for example, I'll make this up. If somebody is consistently rejecting orders, I'm making this up. This is not a rule in the marketplace. So if somebody is consistently rejecting orders, maybe maybe some marketplace might think that, okay, this person is probably not really interested in the marketplace. So maybe, a human can actually flag it, or a machine can flag it. And then it goes to a human review, where the human basically is like, okay, let me talk to this person. What's going on? Like, are they not delivering, consistently not, let's say, delivering their orders on time? Let me talk to them, etc. There could be, and some of the incidents can be even more egregious, right? If you're consistently late, if you're consistently not on time, maybe there is a three strikes policy. After the third time, you are now looking to actually kick this person off the platform. There are situations where you have to do that. But the point is that when there are that kind of situations where you have to actually block somebody off the platform, it is better to have a high-touch process where somebody is looking at it's not a machine that is kind of trying to do this, right? Because that becomes very sort of, as best as possible, there is some human review involved. Hopefully not at scale. Hopefully you're not kicking all your supply pool out of the platform at a large degree. So that is one thing. The second example is even more interesting. So Uber has this feature, and I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but Uber has this feature which is called rider safety feature, or generally a safety feature. And what happens is that when Uber has suggested a route, right? They have suggested a route for a driver to go from point A to point B to drop off a passenger. Depending on many circumstances, like is this like a suburban area? It's not a very populated area. Is this night? Is the passenger a female, for example? Like many of these factors go into account. If they see that the driver has either deviated from that route or they have taken a pit stop somewhere, which was not expected, that can cause a big security incident. These type of things, for example, where the platform allows it, they cannot stop you from deviating against the route, right? But in this case, they actually do have machine learning. This is one example where you cannot actually have humans looking at these things because they're happening in real time, they're happening so fast. You're getting millions of these pings from GPS all the time. So you need to build machine learning to automate that at scale. Well, guess what? The flip side of not doing something like this for a company is extremely high. The cost is very, very high. Even one incident is one too many, right? So there are things where you have to invest a disproportionate amount of your energy and time in saying that it's a zero strikes, like no exceptions allowed. There are cases where you can actually run it or you should actually run it with humans in the loop, because those are your more sensitive and more kinder parts of your business, and you want to be more careful when you're running those parts of the business. So.
Jacob, anything to add here on the solutions?
Just for solutions,
yeah.
I would say, just some recommendations, I guess. I guess I have 4 recommendations, right? So first of all, know your customer. So, you know, from the beginning, like try to catch and identify fraud as early as possible. KYC, document verification, you know, the earlier the better. I would say number 2, use fraud detection tools, so device fingerprinting, passive biometrics, 2-factor authentication. You know, as much, you know, you want to have a balance with friction. You don't want to introduce too much friction. You want to allow good users to go through. You want to add some friction for the more suspicious users. And then I would say have a clear straightforward refund policy. And then number 4, you know, overall education, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I think it's important to educate your users, your buyers, your sellers, like on a regular basis, and your own company on some of the threats, some of the fraud trends that are happening, so people could look out for it, because sometimes the marketplaces aren't fully ready for what's the next, you know, triangulation or buyer-seller collusion, or you know, so it's important to continue the education and knowledge sharing around that.
Well, I think the only thing I had to add here is when we get to the extreme case of blocking a user, right? Sometimes this is not enough, right? Why is that? If you don't have, for example, a very well-structured KYC process at onboarding, this person could just come back with another identity and do the same thing. So making sure that you're able to re-identify these bad actors, trying to use different identities is super critical. And I would recommend taking a look at 3 types of data, more importantly. The first one, you've mentioned device fingerprinting, right? Being able to identify that device, trying to create multiple accounts is super critical. But there are many device fingerprinting solutions that are not that resilient. As we know, like iOS and Android, the big like mobile platforms, for example, have been making it more challenging to fingerprint devices. Same applies to the browsers, right? Safari and Firefox, they have been implementing these new privacy policies that obviously we understand the intentions, but they have been making it more challenging to uniquely identify a device over time, right? So how do you understand if it's the same device if the person is trying to circumvent those protections, right? That's a real challenge, particularly on mobile, for example. Many of the device fingerprinting solutions I've tested so far are not able to detect if the device has been reset, right? And if I'm a fraudster, if I'm a professional fraudster, which is the case for most people, I would take the time to go through that, right? I would take the time to reset my phone and do it again and create a new account as if I was a new person. Same applies to, in some instances, having multiple devices. Depending on how much money I'm doing, I would be willing to buy multiple phones, right, and use these multiple devices at the same time. And there is even a more extreme case here, which is if I'm making a lot of money, I would actually start hiring people and have a team performing these things, like creating these accounts. So you really need to make sure that your device ID solution is able to, 1, detect device resets. That's super important. Second thing is identify the links between different devices, right? So being able to relate, okay, this device is actually being used by the same person that's using this other device. There are different ways of doing that, but I would say that looking at this would be super critical. Second point is around analyzing network data. Again, there are other ways that fraudsters use to get around these protections, like hidden proxies, VPNs, Tor exit nodes, etc. So identifying the true IP address of that user is important. The connections that this user is using, like the Wi-Fi access points that they're accessing and things like that is also important. So you make sure that you're really identifying the true IP address of that user and the network data. And again, many like marketplaces and financial services apps that I tested already were not very good at detecting these things. For example, even in some cases, like commercial VPN solutions were not detected. If I'm a fraudster, I'm not using the commercial VPNs, right? I'm probably doing something a little bit more sophisticated. So making sure that you're being able to detect these things is super important. And then finally, one other point to add here, which is more specific to some types of fraud, is related to location data, because this is, at least in our experience, what we have been using to make those links. So for example, if we see an iPhone 12 Pro that was like that looks clean, but its location is the same of an iPhone 12 Pro that was committing fraud a day ago, well, it's probably the same device. That's how we link it to say, okay, this device was reset, right? So location data can help create those links between devices, but also re-identify devices that were reset. So I think you can leverage it for those purposes, but also to detect things like to fight refund abuse, for example. Well, did the driver actually get there? Well, if you have good location spoofing capabilities, you can prove if the person actually went there or if they were spoofing the location data. So I would take a look at these three types of data and ensure that the quality of that data is really high, because it doesn't really matter if you're checking the box if that type of data is very easily spoofed. So you need to go deep, and I would always recommend going very deep instead of trying to go broad and have like, okay, I'm analyzing all of these different data points, but they're all very easy to spoof. It doesn't really help that much.
Yeah, I'll just say that there is a phrase in machine learning which says garbage in, garbage out. I think that's what Andre is referring to, that if you train your algorithms, if you make your decisions based on just a lot of variance in data, a lot of data that is noise rather than a true signal, obviously you are going to make a lot of wrong decisions and wrong judgments in your business as well. So.